Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast, a part of the Immigration Lawyers Toolbox, an education and marketing publication for the immigration law community that includes legal updates, interviews, discussions, education and CLE material, and more. Note that the information here is for general education only and not intended as individual legal advice. The laws change frequently, so you should consult with an attorney about your specific case. For more information, please visit immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're doing 10 questions today with our colleague, Karin Wolman. Karin is, you've seen her name on the listserv, so I'm sure everyone who's viewing has at least seen her avatar, her name somewhere. She was kind enough to join us on a panel about United Kingdom visa processing and documents related to UK nationals. That's part of the Immigration Lawyers Toolbox with the all-star panel. Hopefully we're going to have the rest of the team on the show too. But today I just wanted to get to know Karin so people put a story behind the name that they keep saying. Thank you, Karin, for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
Awesome. So let's get started. Karin, where did you grow up? Where are you from?
I am from Monmouth County, New Jersey, and I grew up in Rumson and visiting my grandparents in New York, and I went to high school in New Hampshire, and I went to college in New York City, and then I went to UCLA for law school, and then I came right back.
Oh, awesome. You know, a lot of people come to LA, get stuck here. What got you to go back and not stay?
LA is not really for me. I could have a really fun visit there, but the Sunday after I graduated from law school, I was halfway across the Mojave at 8:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So what went from law school to immigration law? Did you start practicing immediately, or did you kind of find your way into it?
Here's the story. Okay, so I graduated from law school in 1990, which, as you may or may not be aware, was a pretty big recession. Not quite as big as the one we're in now, but it was pretty big. And I graduated law school with an all public sector resume in the middle of a huge recession. And I came back to New York, and I was crashing with a friend in Williamsburg, and she was working at BAM, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, which happens to be the nation's oldest performing arts center. And I temped my way around the building. And I worked at the Brooklyn Philharmonic Orchestra, and I worked in the development department, and I worked in special events, and I worked in production. I forget how many departments I temped in, but sooner or later, somebody offered me a full-time job with benefits, which at the time seemed like a really good idea. So I ended up working as an admin in an arts organization for 4 years.
Wow.
And I did all kinds of stuff. Some of it clerical, some contract admin, some legal or quasi-legal. I happened to be there when the O&P visas were first introduced, and they had a huge off-site production involving a very large, distinguished French theater company. And this was their first experience as a major entertainment venue dealing with these new visa categories. And to sort of guide us through that process, they had hired a fancy Washington lawyer who had been one of the lawyers who helped draft those regulations. And his name was Jonathan Ginsberg. And Jonathan and I have served on national committees together. I inherited his O&P visa survey article. We have a running joke that he taught me everything I know, which is not the truth. But structurally, he taught me how to think about visas and really gave me the foundation of what the O&P categories were about. And so even though I was not working as an attorney, I was doing legal work among other kinds of stuff, including stagehand payroll, like really a wacky amalgam of jobs. But I had a good time and I learned a lot. And then after 3 years of doing O's and P's, among many other things, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, I was an expert in a brand new visa category that plenty of practicing attorneys weren't familiar with. So I had a marketable skill.
Do you know what people were doing before O's and P's? What categories they would use?
Oh, yeah. The H-1B distinguished merit and ability was what there was. And it was a loose and bad fit. And the H-1B regulations just don't accommodate the way so many people work. I mean, this was in the era many decades before the Neufeld memo, but the H-1B category is tied to the idea that you have one job at one employer and you have a salary. And there's an employer-employee relationship, and there's salary and benefits, and you get a W-2. And in the arts and in sports and design, in lots of fields, people don't work like that. And the beauty of the O and P visa categories is they were designed to accommodate a huge array of different types of work arrangements. And even in this extraordinarily tight, unforgiving adjudications climate that we're in now, it is still true that if somebody qualifies as a person of extraordinary ability or someone doing something culturally unique, they can get paid based on ticket sales, they can get paid on commission, they can get paid piecework or hourly or union scale. The arrangements are as vast as human imagination, and as long as you specify what it is, it's allowed. Because those categories were created to accommodate the way artists and athletes work, which is very often not in an employer-employee setting.
You know, one of the problems that emerges is the itinerary portion of the, especially COVID-19, but even before that, the flexibility that's needed. Sometimes they're really flexible, USCIS officers, sometimes they get really hardcore. What has been your experience with how loose you could explain the itinerary, especially when you have a concert?
I don't know if you were practicing back before the 09 memos, but there was a brief period when they decided, okay, there's this fixed period of time, and if you have a gap between events of 45 days, then we're denying it. Or we're just cutting off your itinerary and you get your 3.5 months up until that event. And then there's a gap too big, so you just get until that portion. And many industries pushed back and said, are you insane? And the service actually listened to people at that time. The good old days. And so there's a bit of flexibility. So there's no hard and fast rule. It's not 30 days or 45 days or even 60 days, but it has to make sense. And you have to be obviously earning enough in your field to make a living. They're not going to give you a work visa to do one gig every 2 months and, freelancing at McDonald's or whatever you want to do in the rest of your time. That's not what those visas are for. You have to show that you're coming here to do paid work and that you are getting paid enough to not illegally do other work.
Which is the thing they worry about the most, especially under this administration. But so you were at the school. How did you make the transition to start your own law firm? Because that's a big jump from doing this, all this work that's kind of unrelated and related to immigration law. How did you make the transition?
You're making a huge jump there because when I was at BAM, which is not a school, it's a theater. It's a performing arts institution, and there's grown-up programming and children's programming, and there's the Next Wave Festival, and there's a spring opera season, and there's a bunch of offshoot entities that do programming at BAM as well. But I didn't go straight from there to running my own firm. I went from BAM, where I did visas and contracts and a bunch of other administrative chores, including being assistant company manager. I went from there to a couple months of coding projects. Oh, that was not fun. Lots of wood products litigation. I know more about particle board than I ever wanted to. And so I went from there to a small firm, and I worked at that firm for about 2.5 years. And then I went to a slightly larger firm and I worked there for 8 years. And in those settings, I learned an awful lot of employment-based immigration law, because then I wasn't just doing performing arts visas. Then I was doing perm cases and all kinds of immigrant and non-immigrant work, H-1Bs, Ls, all of it. And, so I worked for a very tiny mono-ethnic practice, and then I worked for a larger, more diverse practice, lots of industries, people from everywhere. And so I didn't hang out my own shingle until 2006. Okay. So I have been solo for 14 years, and I am a true solo. I have no staff. I'm in a service business center, so, I have people who answer the phone and screen calls, but just me.
So, what gave you the courage, or what did you dislike so much about the previous situation that you decided to go solo? Because it's a big emotional decision to do something like that.
It's a huge emotional decision, especially if, like me, you come from a family that has no tradition of entrepreneurship. My dad worked for Bell Labs and then for a private research foundation, and my mother worked for a series of university teaching hospitals and similar, she was a cytogeneticist and pathologist, and he did applied math and traffic theory. And so, there was no hey, let's run a small business. There was none of that in my family. Mm-hmm. And so I had to get to a place where I really felt like I had enough expertise. Because I don't really think that it's ethical to treat your clients as guinea pigs.
Yeah.
And one of the things that makes me really uncomfortable with young attorneys who hang out a shingle fresh out of law school is, how's anybody going to teach you how to do this stuff? You're experimenting on your clients.
This serves in the last 2 days, I saw a couple of questions that were really basic that got me worried that you mentioned that about adjustments and immediate relative categories, or just stuff that are not knowing constant processing weight.
On a listserv or a message board, you see a question so basic that it kind of makes your hair stand on end, and you go, "Kid, shouldn't you be working for somebody else?"
That's the point I'm trying to do, is at least because people are going to do it anyways, kind of have some books and material, ebooks or something like that. So at least have somewhere to get this.
There's a lot of books, there's a lot of resources, and there are a lot of people who are willing to share what they know. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the most beautiful things about the practice of immigration law, aside from just legit arm's length benchmarks of whether you're any good at it, do you get stuff approved? Mm-hmm. Yes or no? We work in a field where you get real benchmarks. There are objective ways to test whether you're any good at it.
Yeah.
But even more so than that is the huge and extraordinarily symbiotic and supportive community. Mm-hmm. We're in this very traumatic period where we're all running around like dinosaurs under a sky full of flaming rocks, but we can call on each other, and we do. And that's why there's so much activity on those listservs.
Yeah. So what was it where you decided to go solo? You're in a firm, you probably have a good situation. Was it, it's as much as you feel like talking about, but it's a big decision to go when you have a regular position in a firm.
I decided it was time to make my own luck. And this was one of the biggest things, one of the biggest quality of life improvements. And this is regardless of whether you decide to go big or small, whether you go into partnership with somebody else or go solo, whether you decide to start out with a couple of paras and staff up or not. One of the most important things to me about running my own practice was doing my own intake and choosing the cases that I would work on.
There you go, yeah.
You choose your clientele.
Yeah.
And that was really one of the most important parts of going solo.
Yeah, I interview.
Shape what kinds of cases you're mostly going to work on.
Mm-hmm. And the people too.
And the people.
Yeah.
And this is down there in the tiny fine print on the as a footnote on the bottom of every page of my website, but it's there because I really believe it. Choosing a lawyer, especially for an immigration matter, is an important professional and personal decision. This is somebody who's going to impact how you get towards a goal in your life.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be somebody you can communicate with, and your lawyer has to get you.
Yeah.
One of the hard things about working with people in the O&P space, but this also goes for like not new business L1s, is you'll talk to somebody in a consult and you'll realize that they've been guided towards something that's a really inappropriate solution for them because the last attorney they talked to didn't really get what the person's about and what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So talk about your career goals, talk about what you're trying to achieve with this business, and see if the attorney really gets it.
Yeah. And that knowing the person and what their goals are 5-10 years down the line, it's above the law. It's not like saying technically, okay, do you satisfy this criteria? It's kind of like what's going on with this person. That person relationship is so important. And one thing when I interview managing attorneys at firms and stuff like that, they always tell me, I'm so jealous that you could do that, or you could pick and choose your clients in that type of cases. Because once you have that overhead that you got that keep that trip rolling, you can't say no that easily to people that come knock at your door, and you can't spend the time to just get to know them and talk with them as you could as solo. Yeah.
But everybody has a different idea of what happens up front, and I can't tell you. I mean, uncountable the numbers of times somebody says, "Oh, I don't need to pay for consultation. I don't need a meet and greet. I already know what I'm looking for."
Yeah.
Well, that's nice for you, but that's not what a consultation is.
Yeah.
My consultation fee is not at the bottom of the barrel, but it is not the most expensive out there. But I charge seriously for a consultation because you're going to talk to me for 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and you're going to ask a lot of questions. You're going to learn about the parameters of all of the categories you claim to be interested in, and I'm going to learn enough about your situation to discern which of those may or may not be appropriate for you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of a consultation as a meet and greet at all. It's when you frame what's possible. It's when you begin to develop case strategy.
Yeah. It's so hard. I've had it too difficult to even try to explain what a consultation really is, because people think it's just an excuse for me to take some money. Then I kind of give up. Someone asks, I say, you know what, pass. I don't go into it. But bringing it to words in a way that everyone could understand is going to be hard. But of what a consultation really means when it's done correctly is difficult, but it's such an important thing.
Training for eligibility, really, for all the things they might possibly want.
Mm-hmm.
And that is long-term value.
Well, it's getting to know you, getting to know them.
And honest,
Yeah.
and telling their whole story so you know what it is they're trying to achieve, and you can find out what's possible.
I did a consultation recently with someone who fell out of F1 status because they didn't file their OPT-AD in time, and they were trying to find a resolution. We're going through reinstatement, and we're going back and forth of an email. It's a student that
graduated without getting the OPT?
They submitted the OPT, but they submitted on the 31st day, so their I-20 was past 30 days for the I-20.
Oh.
And USS took like 4 months to give it, so they ran out of a grace period. And I initially just took the emails for free because I'm a professor at a different school, so I just did that. And then we're going back and forth. I'm like, let's just do a consultation. We did it. It turns out the person acquired citizenship at birth, and they had a lawyer who.
Wonderful.
It is, but now like getting the documents has been a disaster because the father passed away many years ago, and that before the father passed away, he had hired an attorney who for some reason filed an N600K. One of those, I do immigration 5% of the time. I do personal injury, everything else, and submitted all his wrong documentation. They thought doesn't work, and now the guy's dead. So
with an N600, you only get one shot. There's no do-over.
You could apparently have to file you can't do another S600. You have to file an AO appeal, even about or BIA or something like that.
You have to go the appeal route. You can't just like refile.
Yes, there was such a case, but we're just trying to get the passport for now to hold him over so he can stay and finish school and do OPT, all this kind of stuff. But it was just like, unless I said talk with him during the emails, like it didn't pop up, back and forth for free or even a 10-minute discussion. This was like half an hour into the conversation. I was like, well, what do your parents do? And I go, my dad passed away. I'm like, well, where did he grow up? And just, you dive into these personal kind of situations, and it's something as glaringly obvious as this person's a citizen already pops up. A 28-year-old person just realizes they've been a citizen their whole lives. It's like, how did that happen? But it happens frequently enough where things just happen where you're like, how'd that get missed? So
and there are the ones where it's not obvious and somebody comes to you with a very long story and you discover that there's a long shot, but it's worth taking.
mm-hmm.
I got a woman's US citizenship acquired at birth restored. Back in the early 80s, American consuls, and especially in like Mexico City and Ciudad Juarez, were really aggressive about taking away the citizenship of dual nationals. And this young woman had 2 US citizen parents, and basically they moved to Mexico when she was very young, I've forgotten all of the factual details, but basically she was a dual national, born in Mexico to 2 US citizens who had grown up here and gotten married here, and had a lengthy history in one of the big border towns. And when she was 20, single, living at home, her father pressured her to go into the US Embassy and renounce because he didn't have Mexican citizenship, and you needed Mexican citizenship to register a company there. And in those days, there wasn't the benchmark of voluntariness for renunciation that there is now. And I got G325As and affidavits from both of her parents and extended family members and published histories of the family in the town in Texas and, all kinds of stuff. And there's no formal process for this, and I wasn't even sure what department at the State Department would handle it. And I packaged this huge thing and I sent it off, and silence for 3.5, 4 months, just sat there, crossing our fingers and praying. And somebody looked at it, and eventually they wrote back to us and said, we have examined her file and it appears her renunciation was compelled and non-voluntary. And please have her come into the US Embassy and we will restore her US passport.
Wow.
So things that may seem to be impossible are not always impossible. And those are the...
I call a consul with a guy who was potentially going to do a national interest waiver. And he had called because he wanted to see if CISPA applies to them. And I was like, no, unfortunately, you're too old for Child Status Protection Act, won't work for you. But then it was talking about his background. And he's like, I'm not NIW yet. I don't have enough citations. And I said, listen, you never know. You make a good argument. You talk about what you've done, what you're going. And if you want to give it a shot, you give it a shot. It's just, you should.
It's not about the number of citations. It's about who's using your work. What's the impact? Can you point to other places where your work is in use, where it's actually visibly having an impact in your field?
Yeah, this numerical stuff people get caught up in. It's like you got to tell a story and be able to back it up with evidence like that. But you can't sell yourself short. And it's, if they're really devoid of anything, this PhD had work he's done in the field, in a very creative field and stuff like that. So you never know. You never know. You can't sell it short.
And I worry a lot about that because, in this harsh climate, people, especially USCIS adjudicators, get very hung up on numbers games.
Yeah.
It isn't about the numbers.
Yeah.
And so, we need to...
we're seeing this, and we're talking about your focus is on O1s, and our colleagues are posting.
It's a focus. I do O's, I do EB1s and national interest waivers, but I also do a lot of H's and L's and perm and TNs, and I work with all kinds of businesses, not just in the arts. I do work with a lot of creatives, but I also work with finance and manufacturing and healthcare. I have a big cap exempt client, so I do H's year round.
Do you do any removal, humanitarian, or family-based?
I do not do any removal defense. I do not do asylum. That's not my gag. I do a little bit of family because if you practice immigration law, you do marriage cases. That's you all do them.
Yeah.
A fair amount of naturalization, including some complex ones, and the interesting 751s.
Mm-hmm.
Waivers of the joint filing requirement, living apart cases, that kind of stuff. But if there's a chance it's gonna end up in front of a judge, I look at it and go, I'm referring to my friend so and so.
Yeah, same here. So within the employment-based, business-based kind of stuff, what are your favorites that you like the most, or that you, if someone's gonna refer you, so you prefer they know you as that?
Well, I love the O's, and not just in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the beauty of the O is that it accommodates everything.
Yeah.
So business and science O's are just as much fun as the arts. And within that sector, I guess my favorite have always been the design professions, where you don't know at the beginning whether you're going for O1A or O1B. Is this business or is it art?
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the evidence, and the individual evidence that the person has is what guides you, because the categories of documents that are accepted are different. And so you let the documentation be your guidepost as to what's possible for that person.
It's interesting. Like, I have people call me and about a certain case, a business case, maybe an L1, and I get a little piece of information, and then I start thinking, like, get nervous. Well, how does this work with that? How does it work with that? But I always have to remember, like, I was reminding myself then, I'm like, I need to talk with a person, see what evidence they have, and let that do the talking. I can't take 4 blurbs of speech or a text that they give me and try to make a whole case out of it. You really got to look at the whole
Especially with an L situation where you got the whole Russian nesting doll thing with companies. It's like, who really owns what here?
Yeah. And you might have everything together, then some sort of, practical thing like ownership documents don't come out right. They didn't put the percentage right. Something like the hard stuff of being a true manager executive, which is what they usually get you, is okay. But you have this one that's the simple part that's wrong, and you're like, oh, we're stuck now. You have to go work for a year or something like that now to fix this up, or sell the company, merge the company, blah blah blah, and that happens enough too.
Yeah, it does.
So what is it that you like the most about being an immigration attorney, about your practice?
What's the most fun? What do I like? Okay, well, we already talked about the community of immigration lawyers, which is just wonderful, of having this immense pool of people you can bounce ideas off of. One of the nice things about a solo is diversity. I mean, I do some families, some nats, a lot of employment, small businesses, large businesses, healthcare, science, academia, theater, I can do everything. Diversity is what keeps it fun. If I did nothing but H's and perm for IT workers, I would slit my wrists. Boredom is my enemy.
So how do you deal with having such a large clientele, a big company, as well as doing individual clients? Is the kind of service they require very different, or is that not really?
A lot on the type of company and the people. Companies are not monoliths. They have people in them. And, I'm very fortunate right now to have had a lot of continuity at my largest institutional client. But I have a lot of templates and systems that work for them. I got them cap exemption, and you can solve problems faster when you know a lot of the background.
Yeah.
This particular client has several departments that are very geared towards big data and sort of data science and analytics. And they went on a rampage of title changes. And I was like, whoa, what are you doing? This whole department depends on, you have a very large number of hires who need visa sponsorship, and you want to watch it with the random title changes.
Yeah. Usually we're the last to find out they do this kind of stuff. Yeah. And yeah, what is it that you dislike the most about practicing immigration, especially in 2020? I could assume I know what these are. Same for all of us.
Well, right now it's that we're dealing with 5 federal agencies, at least 3 of which do not follow the law, the regs, or their own policy guidance. But on an individual level with clients, it's, I just have a quick question.
How long is it going to take? When is the embassy going to open up?
Question. Yeah, and the answer is it a quick question, or is it one that I can answer in 5 seconds? Because if your question is, how do I get a green card? That's not a quick question.
Yeah. You have screeners on the phone. I take my own calls even, and so I have to be very creative on stopping that question without being offensive, so I don't leave a bad review or something.
I'll talk to anybody for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But if they want to tell me a long story, no, that's a consultation.
Exactly.
Your dentist doesn't give you time for free. Guess what? I don't either.
Exactly. And so, I mean, next question is, what kind of memorable moments have you had? And you've gone through a lot already. We're talking about.
We talked about the woman who renounced, who I got her citizenship restored, but there's a darker one that's kind of fun and very memorable. So this couple comes in for an initial consult, and there's a lot of muttering and sort of ominous incantations. There's, the guy says when he's on the phone with me, making the appointment, there is a child. Okay, there very often is, so what? Well, so they come in, and they're not a married couple. She's married to somebody else. And it very slowly comes out that she's got her permanent residence and her child is a U.S. citizen, but this guy who's with her is the child's father.
Oh boy.
And she wants to know if her traveling abroad with the child is problematic. No. Can I naturalize? Well, yeah, but no. Let's talk about that some more. It doesn't really come out until a second consult several weeks later that the guy she's with in front of me is the brother of the U.S. citizen husband who petitioned for her. And he is the father of said child. And she wants to know if, while she is still married to USC Hubs, she can file for citizenship under the 3-year rule. And I look at the paper trail and I go, you have some problems here. And one of them is, you didn't disclose this child on your I-751.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the reason for that was USC Hubs does not want to be responsible for child support for that kid that he knows is not his.
Mm-hmm.
But really her goal is she wants to become a citizen as fast as possible and divorce him and marry this guy who's still an LPR.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. These scenarios happen more often. You think these crazy kind of scenarios. When you're immigration lawyer, you deal with every type of person.
Questions come to life and sitting down in front of you, and there were a lot of things wrong with that one. And I ended up not representing her. And I said, even if you wait until the 5-year mark, your N400 could have problems with
misrepresentation.
Fraud.
Yeah.
Because she gave birth to this child, less than a year into the marriage. And then they didn't disclose the child on the I-751.
I mean, nowadays, they've gotten so strict on going back and challenging bona fide I-130s even years afterwards. So there'll be misrep and bona fide issues, not telling this child. It's a minefield of how they rip that one apart.
One of the things that I think is very sad about how expansive the forms have gotten. I mean, the acreage of ink and trees wasted on garbage forms.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. within my memory, within my practice history, a G28 was 1 page, an I-485 was 4 pages. All of that information on the G325, 1 page.
Yeah.
And now it takes 4 pages to say, I'm the client and this is my lawyer.
Yeah.
Which is craziness. It's just.
Yeah, the NAT form went super long too. And then they're just going to get longer. I keep seeing these proposed changes. So
They keep getting longer, and the service is just making a mockery of the Paperwork Reduction Act.
Mm-hmm.
Things just get longer and longer, but they're collecting less and less useful data. Mm-hmm. They're not giving us a succinct chance to say, this is what's what. The old I-130, which was only 2 pages, now it's 12 for the petitioner and 6 for the beneficiary. The old 2-page I-130 had a little question at the top of page 2, which basically said, you two ever been married to each other before? Which turns out to be something that's very common in human experience. My own grandparents got divorced for 5 years and then they remarried each other. Mm-hmm. So it happens a lot.
Yeah, to add on to that I-944 and everything else, like these packages, like I just submitted a marriage adjustment and the I-944 was the same thickness as the application package without it. And I'm like, they just
strip search and it's pointless.
Yeah. It's just like, who officer's going to look through all this? I mean, like, and it's so easy.
It's there to give them discretion to say no if they get a bad vibe.
Exactly. It opens up one mistake, one error there, they can get you on something specific.
Way for them to have an opaque curtain. It's their version of consular discretion. Pay no attention to that man behind the mm-hmm. curtain. He's going to make a decision, and it may or may not be related to any specific fact in the record.
It's so random. Like about a month ago, USCIS just updated policy manual on discretion. It was like there's no hubbub about it. All of a sudden they're like, yeah, we have this new, we're gonna reiterate our discretion policy, which is we can do
basically what that means is we have discretion to say no just because we feel like it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're gonna take Kazarian and just apply it to everything. The answer is because I said so.
Yeah. And that's why, federal litigation is what immigration lawyers have to do. Have you gotten involved in filing federal lawsuits on these kind of cases yet?
I am about to. I think if you file anything in the high pref area, particularly EB1s and NIWs, the client has to be ready to sue.
Yeah.
Because the amount of arbitrariness, capriciousness, and sheer idiocy coming out of the service centers is such that we're only going to get sensible decisions if we sue them.
Yeah.
I had a great moment of kismet on last Friday. I was uploading my admission documents to Pacer minutes before starting a webinar on federal court litigation.
Congrats. I hope that litigation goes well. Most of them do when the government attorney sees like the decision, like what the hell is this? So it usually ends up pretty well.
Very frequently when a service center decision is off the rails and doesn't comply with law and stated service policy, you get to the point of serving the complaint and the AUSA looks at it and calls them up and is like, you guys, I can't defend this.
But you see a lot of this litigation that's happening with the current administration. You kind of feel bad for the
everything all the time.
It's just like the judges are chewing them out. Like for AUSA is like, how do you defend this kind of stuff? It's kind of crazy, but.
Well, one of the things that is a pattern, especially in the discretionary high pref employment-based stuff, is in the vast majority of cases where they've been irrational and thrown out 3/4 of your evidence, they don't want a court decision.
Exactly.
And they don't want to be responsible for EJF fees. Mm-hmm. So they will settle.
Exactly.
Mostly they will settle because they don't want a published decision saying, you guys aren't playing by your own rules.
Yeah.
And they also don't want to pay attorney's fees.
And, I kind of, most of this litigation gets settled, but I really wish more of it would have a decision so the public can see what we're talking about. Because I even think people who hate immigration will see this stuff and be like, that's kind of crazy. That's not fair. It just, the decency of it really.
I am still beside myself. For the first time in my career, I had an 01 denied this spring in May. and the employer didn't want to go to federal court. And I was like, this guy has been approved for O's for over a decade. He still has 3 international patents on different continents that are still in full force, and they couldn't even explain why that doesn't count as a significant original contribution to the field. The decision was full of garbage logic, and you may remember recently I published that practice pointer on the misapplication of Kazarian in O1A adjudications. Yeah. That was the case that was, I had a case where that happened, and then I got examples from other colleagues. Mm-hmm. I hit up both of the big listservs and asked everybody to shoot me their examples. And so I wrote it up as a practice pointer because it's clear that there's a template, yeah, and that the service now has a pattern and practice of misapplying their own policy guidance. They're doing the exact opposite of what their own memorandum instructs.
Mm-hmm. It's super frustrating,
so
especially
that's hard, and it makes it less fun.
That I think that takes the joy of most out of what I do is when you get these RFEs that are just a waste of time, and you're just like, or the denials sometimes, it's just like, why are you putting people through this? It's so, I mean, it's so obvious on its face that it was a good case. And to file, the money it costs to file a lawsuit, the amount of time it takes for that to go through the system. This person might have to leave the U.S. They might get stuck in a COVID ban. Their work might fall apart.
It's destructive to our economy.
Big time.
And, they don't understand the scope of the damage they're doing.
They don't. I mean, we're job creating entities, especially when you're doing these employment-based kind of cases. These people are bringing in money. They create.
H-1Bs and O's generate far more jobs than they take.
Exactly. And it's just the lack of awareness of this. When I see these kind of visas, they're getting manhandled in this kind of way. It's unbelievable. But let's just move on to happier stuff. So let's say, yeah.
Well, one of the other things is, you have to be able to take a step back from it. Because we are in such a hostile adjudications climate, because it's so crazy with the rules changing, public charge is dead, public charge is alive again. What is it, Rasputin? You have to keep your personal time sacred.
Yeah.
And this is a really hard lesson when you've just hung out a shingle. Every time the phone rings, you think it may be the last time. You think you have to take every case that walks through the door. But for anyone watching now or listening to this, I say, if you are contemplating being a solo, if you are a new solo, for the love of God, use the Saved Drafts folder. Don't respond to inquiries nights, weekends, and around the clock. Because if you let a prospective client yank your chain and treat you like you have no right to a personal life, they will behave that way throughout the length of the client relationship. And you will be exhausted and stressed out, and you can only take good care of your clients if you can take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And, it's not a bad idea occasionally over a weekend to look at the emails and draft a response, but put it in the Saved Drafts folder and don't send it till Monday morning.
Interesting. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So what is one of your favorite methods for marketing your practice to get business?
Oh, I love word of mouth. I mean, I have a really good SEO provider that I've worked with for a long time. I write a lot of content for my own website. I update it frequently. But the best marketing is the marketing I'm not involved in. That's the word of mouth where an existing or former client of yours talks to somebody else and says, oh, you need a lawyer? You should talk to Karin. She's great. And the second best is where I meet people and we're just sort of storytelling and they say, oh, I have something like that. Hey, can you give me your card? It's fun to meet people in person and hear their stories. One of the most fun things for me is a new consult and they say, oh, you were referred to me by so-and-so. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know so-and-so. And then I'm doing detective work to backfill. It's kind of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Like, how did that person hear about me?
Yeah, I hear the same, especially with my podcast, there'll be lawyers I never met before, or listeners refer it. Like, well, this attorney said you're good. I'm like, I have no idea who this person is, but it's very kind of him.
Exactly. It's like, you're, oh, so-and-so referred, but I never heard of so-and-so. Who is that? Where are they? What do they do? And, you know, when you publish and speak, when you're sort of out there, when your work is out there for public consumption, especially by other attorneys, a lot of people know who you are when you don't know who they are.
It's just an important thing to contribute to the community, because that's a big way to get business and helping other immigration attorneys. You always want to work.
I was raised by scientists. Mm-hmm. And so giving back to your professional community and contributing to a living, developing body of knowledge, that's an imperative. That's something I was raised with. Like, in any profession, you don't just do your job and do a good job at it. You contribute to your colleagues, you serve on committees, you write, you share what you know so that other people can benefit from your experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. Not to be afraid of like sharing information because it's going to be competitive or something like that. It really is not the way to go about it.
It's misplaced.
Yeah, I agree.
There's plenty of work to go around.
Yeah, that's true. So last question, it's not immigration related, maybe, but what kind of hobbies or outside hobbies do you have kind of outside of immigration law?
Well, one of them has an immigration moment. One of my favorite things to do is go to the woods and go hiking. Mm. And I have always had this philosophy that a new talk that you haven't given before, when you're planning, when you're on a panel, it's a new talk you haven't given before. It's nice to have notes. It's nice to have an outline, but you got to go off book. Rehearse it with your notes a half a dozen times. Go to the woods, go hiking, give your talk, victimize the poor squirrels and chipmunks with more immigration law than they want to know about. And the mountain bikers who are about to run over you, and the rocks and the tree roots that you trip over, are the stand-ins for the people who interrupt you on your panel. Mm-hmm. And that increases your comfort level with the material and your flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
So that's always, you know, I love to be outdoors and be in nature, and that, what's that wonderful Japanese phrase, shinrin yoku, forest bathing. Being around greenery measurably lowers blood pressure and your heart rate and makes you calmer and happier, all of that. It's good to just get away from the city and be around green stuff. But since COVID, I've also gotten a new hobby. Like about a third of America, I have taken up baking, and I'm making bread. There are 2 loaves of sourdough rising slowly in bannetons in my fridge as we speak.
Wonderful, wonderful. So if people want to reach out to you, what is your email address, or what best way to contact you in any social media?
The best way to contact me is to go to my website, www.kwvisalaw.com. And you can find some information about the case types or the questions that you have. Mm-hmm. And if you want to reach out to me, there's a contact form.
Awesome. And do you have any
but if you just want to shoot me an email, you can use the inquiry mailbox, which is info@kwvisalaw.com.
Wonderful. I guess that's it. Thank you so much, Karin. It was a pleasure getting to know you better, and it's always interesting getting to know a colleague in our space. Everyone's so lovely and nice in our field. I love getting to know people, and
Thank you so much for having me on. It's nice to get to know you better. At some point I'm going to quiz you and learn more about you.
I'm down. Let's do it. Thanks, Karin. You have a great one, and we'll be in touch soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For previous episodes and more, please visit the podcast page of our website, immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com. You can also visit the Toolbox YouTube and LinkedIn pages to catch the video versions of these podcasts, news updates, and a lot more. Immigration lawyers can also contact me to join the private Facebook page. The email is info@immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com.